Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that I am joining this meeting from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and we acknowledge and respect them as the past, present, and future guardians and caretakers of these lands. I'm not going to do a big introduction. Those of you who came in will have heard me and Bill trying to figure out exactly where we first met. We think it may have been like in the Balkans, somewhere around the turn of the century. But the idea of this Tradecraft Week in this session is really to hear about some of the wisdom that is out there among us and our peers, and to discuss. Bill stepped forward when I issued a call asking members if there were any panels, roundtables that they would like to see, or that they would like to lead in areas of their expertise. And I think it's really important that we do that kind of thing, because one of my frustrations with the department over the years, and I think that IRCC has some of the same issues, but I don't have as much experience with them, is that we tend to bring in and platform outside experts all the time and not notice and appreciate some of the wisdom and expertise that is us. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill to start leading a discussion on his area of expertise as a long-serving member of our management consular stream.
For so many years.
Bill, over to you.
For so many years. I think not only do we not recognize the expertise in our department, but we go out of our way to hire people who are really, really good at what we hire them to do. And for a huge number of people, we don't hire them to be managers. We hire them to do something else, and then in the best tradition of Peter, promote them to be managers and hope for the best. And I was wearing a ZIV mission inspections hat for a number of years. And we try really well as a group to manage our programs and deliver on what the government wants us to deliver. But often what we don't have is some of those skills that would make the management part less stressful. We're really good at producing the work that we need to do, and more uncomfortable, I have discovered, and anybody can argue with me about this one, but I dare you. But the key becomes we just don't understand some elements of how the mechanisms work to get that job done. So what I was hoping to do today is talk about some of that. A large number of you are still muted. I will strongly encourage you to use your hands and your voices as often as you want during this session, mostly because, as I was explaining earlier, we all have a lot to give everybody and learn from everybody, because we've all been in different places doing different things. And you can't be somewhere without learning something that somebody else can't benefit from. So I do encourage you to participate. Certainly what I will do, I had this list of sort of 9 broad areas of management to cover. And Marty, one of the organizers here, looked at me and said, "That's an awful lot for an hour." And I thought, yeah, I could probably use 2 weeks. So I'm going to go very briefly through my list of stuff. I will start at the top of my list and work down. If anybody wants me to cover a particular area, let me know. This is a sharing expedition. We want people to come away from this saying, wow, am I ever glad I learned that today? Or am I ever glad I got a chance to share that with everybody today? Remember, when we're sharing, this is management oriented. You may have a fabulous recipe for a zucchini loaf. We're not interested today. You can send it to anybody you want afterwards, but this is not a zucchini loaf day. This is how to get your program to function. So I'm going to talk briefly about getting the job done. And you'll see what I mean in a minute, because I really want to start with that because it's hugely important. Other options we can look at is how to make the most of your meetings. Oh, there's a good one. I like to tell people, and this is not meant to offend anybody, ex-CETA people, but when I look at my calendar, the CETA people book an hour and a half, the GAC people book an hour, and everybody needs 40 minutes max. So let's talk about how to manage your staff in meetings. Managing staff, And that's a really broad category, but understanding what they bring to the table is very important. This huge distinction between being a boss and being their friend, an area that we fail in fairly regular that I can cover. I want to talk a bit about managing risks and how to deal with mistakes. This is a department that tends not to look at mistakes and risk in a way that certainly private industry doesn't, many other departments. We can do a little bit on managing conflict, but there are way better people than me to talk about this. Making decisions. There's some pretty fundamental rules that we tend to forget when making decisions. I can talk about delegation, trusting your staff, and consultation processes. Near and dear to everybody, but it's at the bottom of my list. So before I get into this, any questions? I've been powering through, wasted 5 minutes already. Oh, Suzanne. Nothing. Let's start with getting the job done. What does this mean? The Government of Canada has objectives. Some of these objectives are related to being abroad, and clearly it is our role abroad and at headquarters to some extent to carry out these objectives. Prime Minister has objectives, our Minister has objectives, our DMs, our ADMs, DG, if you have a director, your director has objectives. Our job is to do those things. But I say with some degree of caution, as a manager, it's not your job to do those things. You may have a doing function in your job description, but I'm not talking about your doing function. We're talking about your ability to manage. And if you are managing, what you are trying to do to the best of your abilities is to support your staff. Make sure they're properly trained. Make sure they understand what they need to do. Facilitate them in every way you can so they can get their jobs done properly. If they come to you with a problem and something is not being done, it is not your job to do it. It is your job to manage the performance of your employees to ensure that they are getting it done. In the consular business, we talk a lot about the monkey. Somebody comes to you with a problem and there's a monkey sitting on the person's shoulder. If you let that monkey sit on your shoulder, you now have to feed and care for the stupid thing. Your job is to keep that monkey firmly sitting on somebody else's shoulder and help them learn how to manage it. It's a pretty vividly wonderful explanation. Any fans will recognize a few episodes of Monkey. Don't take the monkey. Manage your staff so that your staff can manage the monkey on their own. I see a lot of someone comes into your office and says, can you do this for me? And you go, yeah, I got 15 minutes. Sure, no problem. Who's the boss here, for Pete's sake? I'm not saying that not helping out is a bad thing. I'm saying be very clear that you are helping out in the context of, yeah, this time because you're down. And we will talk about later what the problem is. Why couldn't you get this done? You are the boss. And this alludes a little bit to one of the topics I was talking about, this boss or friend thing. It's, so tell me, how exactly do you fire a friend? This is your reality. You have people working for you and you can potentially remove their livelihood from them. I am not saying don't be friendly. It's a style I particularly enjoy, but certainly be friendly across the board. If you're having a party at your place, the invitation goes to everybody, not your 3 favorites. I've had Halloween parties at home. All my staff are invited. It's as simple as that. This is a get together for a team, not a friendship opportunity. Again, you can manage exceptions, but realize that these are exceptions. The same person that you went for dinner with last night or shared a cottage with last summer, you may have to fire tomorrow. And how do you face the fact that they look at you and say, You can't do that. I'm your friend. No, I'm your boss. I can be kind, I can be friendly, I can be all those things, but I have to get a job done and you're not doing your share. Let's solve that problem in a nice, friendly way. I have hands. Go, Pam.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of chime in on that comment and see if maybe you have some of the same reflections that I am developing over the last little while. I mean, I get an interesting perspective now as president of PAFSO, and now that I can devote kind of full-time attention to it, I see and hear a lot of people's angst with managers, and every so often I'll have a pang and realize like, oh yeah, I probably did things and do things as a manager that I didn't realize. And one of the things that I think managers in global affairs and IRCC sometimes have is I think people don't realize that the weight of the things you say and do changes for people when you're in that position of power with them. And I really feel like managers, like certainly frontline managers, are not given enough kind of training on how to assume this new role. I have horrible memories. I mean, I was lucky to learn this in a relatively low stakes environment with a young student who was very kind and forgiving and confident, But I remember the first time I was deputy director, the student we were both in the cafeteria having afternoon coffee, and he was still there with his friends when I was leaving. And I jokingly said to him, ha ha ha, are you still here? And his friends just looked horrified. And within 2 minutes, he was in my office. I just went back to my office, not thinking anything of it because it was a slow day and, he was getting his work done and didn't bother me if he was having a coffee, but he was in my office apologizing. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to take so long. And that taught me that, okay, I cannot joke with people the same way as I could when I was their peer. And sometimes I see a lot of problems caused by managers not seeming to understand some of that, not realizing that things they say and do land differently.
And be aware, this is also very, very cultural. I was talking to an MCO at a mission where society was very hierarchical. And there was some work going on. They were falling behind, and he thought it was a perfectly good idea to get in there and help. Okay, it feels uncomfortable as a manager, unless you're road crew watching the hole get filled, to sit back and watch somebody else work. And sometimes you just want to help. And he had a time, and they were struggling, and there's nothing wrong with this, getting in and helping. But in that hierarchical environment, immediately he lost a couple steps on the ladder because bosses don't do that. So this also brings to mind the fact you've really got to be aware of where you are and how the system works. But that just reinforces even more the idea that you're the boss. The problem is the other end in cultures like Canada, for example, where people think nothing of rolling up your sleeves and throwing in and helping. And yeah, that can work. But treat everybody equally. Say, yeah, I can take a couple of minutes on. Let them know, yeah, you're helping. You're still the boss. So, I mean, I could talk about this for 2 days of my 2 weeks, but I just don't have that time. And I want to get to a couple other points of getting a job done. And a really, really difficult one for a lot of people in our department. I don't care what stream you are, what your background is. If things go wrong in your program, you accept the blame. And if things go right, you share the credit. We tend in our department to get that mixed up and do it the other way around. Oh, I'm sorry about this. My assistant messed up. No, I'm sorry, it went wrong. I will fix it is the correct answer. You are the boss. This is your job. This is why you get paid more money. You can have a private conversation with your assistant afterwards. And here I'm going to give you one of those lovely little trademarked takeaways. praise publicly, pan privately. Remember the 4 Ps. Don't mix that one up. I had a head of mission at one of my missions who decided to excoriate one of my staff in a CMM. And I said, sir, that is absolutely and totally unacceptable. And I walked out of CMM. And everybody but the head of mission came back to me afterwards and said, well done. We tend to get these things backwards. Don't get them backwards. This is your job as a boss. So I'm going to be really quick through these things. Any questions about sort of that concept of how to get the job done? A dearth of yellow on my screen. Excellent. That means you either all fallen asleep or I'm doing a good job. I'm going to assume the latter. I want to talk a bit about how to use your meeting time more effectively. I half jokingly mentioned the difference between a CETA meeting and a GAC meeting, but there's a rule about meetings. Why are you having one? You don't have a meeting because every Tuesday at 10 o'clock you all get together. Go for coffee somewhere. That's not a meeting. Are you going there to tell people stuff? Are you going there to ask people their opinions about something, or are you going to a two-way sharing? One of the lovely things about Outlook is it's so easy to automatically book an hour. Do not feel any obligation to use that entire hour if you don't need it. The other thing that our department is really, really bad at is if I book a meeting at 10 o'clock, a number of people will show up around 5 after. And then I waste the next 5 minutes welcoming all these people and sitting them down and summarizing what happened in the first 5 minutes. And just like that, I've lost 15 minutes of meeting time. That is not acceptable. And I was talking to Marty earlier about this. If I book a meeting for 10 o'clock, we start at 10 o'clock. Because if everybody understands that I'm prepared to wait 5 minutes, then the new baseline for how late I can be is now 10:05. And now they start showing up at 10 after. Because they're only 5 minutes late and no one's there at 10 o'clock anyway. They're not going to show up until 5. So I can be there at 10 after. And crumb, if I kept this up for long enough, we'd have 5-minute meetings and be 5 minutes late at 11 o'clock for a 10 o'clock meeting. People's time is valuable. Your time is valuable. And once people find out that a 10 o'clock meeting starts at 10 o'clock, and they look really silly because they're lost because they showed up 10 minutes later, they have incredible incentive to show up on time. And it's your meeting, you are in charge, you are allowed to do that. Again, for those who love Outlook, I regret the fact that our department doesn't have an automatic 10-minute period, 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after every meeting for people to get in and out. I've sat outside conference rooms for a long time, waiting for people to finish chatting about the weather or something when I want to get my meeting started. Be considerate of the people coming after you. I just throw that in because it's a really pet peeve of mine. But start on time. Know how long you think it's going to take to talk about this. If things go off the rails, figure out how to get back on. And talk about the stuff that is important for everybody. You're not there because they've paid $25 and you're putting on a show. You're there because there's something important that has to happen. Accept the fact that if there's an objective to a meeting, it's not an objective, it isn't a person, a time, and a budget involved. Anything else is hypothetical whimsy. And I'll use an example again. I was in a meeting, and this is late September, and I've long since forgotten what the subject was. It was utterly unimportant. As we were closing up the meeting, the chair was saying, are there any questions? And I said, is there a timeline on when you want the response to your question? He said, oh, that's a good idea. And I refrained from banging my head against the table. And he said, how about December? And look, in my life, a deadline is next Tuesday at 10:30, not sometime within a month's spread, an entire season from now. If there is no deadline, there is nothing to strive to get you your work in time. As a manager, remember deadlines. It is so easy to go into someone's office and say, can you finish that report for me? And they go, sure, no problem, and then walk away. No, can you finish that report for me by 10:30 tomorrow morning? Now you have a contract between two people. You as manager, your employee have agreed to a task and a time, and that was the opportunity for the employee to renegotiate something if there was no chance of getting it done by 10:30. And accept that. Yes, listen, how about, 3 o'clock, I've got to finish this. No problem, 3 o'clock is fine. Or I need it by 10:30. What else are you doing? How can we shift that? You are managing a program. You are managing objectives. You are trying to do things. These are often be reasonable, but you don't have to be flexible. You have to get a job done. And now you have a contract with the employee. It doesn't show up at 10:30. It's a performance issue, not a work problem. We both agreed 10:30 was fine. Where is it? Don't be mean. I'm not saying you have to slap people over the hands all the time, but this is part of being the boss. Remember deadlines. And if you really want to be good at this job, remember budgets. A decision that doesn't have someone responsible, a time responsible, and a budget associated with is, as I like to call them, a whimsy. These are things you can dream up in your dreams at night and not have anybody care about. But everything you do has a cost. And if you don't know what the cost is, how do you manage your program? Something else I could talk for 2 full days about. Any questions about sort of the concept? And look, meetings, this goes for bilats. This goes for any time you're getting together with people. If you've got 100 people together or one, all these same rules apply. Have an objective, have some time. Sure, Perry.
Just a couple of things. Number one, about these meetings, you might have found this through your ZIV work, but there are people that are introverts and they don't speak up even though they're paying attention. So I think a good manager would make sure that they ask everybody to say something at some point. That's one. Number two, when I'm in a meeting, I count how many people are in there. I multiply them times the hour of the meeting times their salary, and I say to myself, did I get $1,000 worth out of this meeting? And of course, agendas really are helpful as well.
Yeah,
so that's my input.
There's some really good stuff online. There's some really good stuff. I think even CFSI has some good stuff on how to run meetings. When we join a department, typically how to manage meetings was not part of any schooling we had ever done in our lives. And yet we become managers and are expected to do this. So this is an area where it's well worth investing some time and trying to do it properly. Let's talk a bit. No one's
Madeline has a question.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Oh, yes, go for it.
Hi, sorry, thanks. I just wanted to ask because I, for the most part, completely agree with what you're saying about meetings. I mean, there's a whole bunch where it's like, this could be an email, which is helpful. But, in the context of the pandemic, and I do realize that, we might have another 6 months or more of this, but we can start to see the end of the tunnel. In some ways, some of that weekly meeting stuff is actually, even though it's sort of two-dimensional on a screen, it's, the one time in a week you're kind of connecting with other people. And I suppose that sometimes does depend on, what division you're in. But in that context, can you sort of talk about how you would see meetings and using, screen time and connection at a time when we're not really able to just everybody go for a coffee instead of having the meeting?
I'm well known for being a person, if you ask me a question, I will tend to give an answer that's really, really long. So I want you to look at all the elements of what you're asking, and maybe there's a better way of doing things, because our job is to do things better. So when you led this conversation, I'm not in any way trying to be offensive here. When you led this in these COVID times, well, COVID has nothing to do with it. We have the tools to meet all the time. So how about you say in your meeting, We're going to start at 10. I encourage people, I will be there to 1:45. If anybody wants to come along and chat for 15 minutes, let's use the time exactly as we did in person. We'd show up 10 minutes early. Because they're Teams meetings, people tend to show up, I use the term loosely, on time. And that interaction is going away. And I fear for that lack of interaction anymore. Encourage your staff to show up 10 minutes early. Chat and say, yeah, what do you think about? And, go Senators. But we will be starting at 10. So use this time to interact with people. Use some time afterwards. We're not paying by the hour for this stuff. So the answer to your question is, what tools do you have available to help those interactions? Let's look at it from a positive and see what's available. And I think that answers the question nicely. That's how can we adapt? Okay, onward. I think I talked a bit about meetings. I talked a bit about the boss or friend thing and the monkey. Don't forget the monkey. The next problem that I find, s'il y a des questions, je m'excuse, j'ai oublié de dire que c'est possible d'avoir des questions en français et en anglais, mais a lot of this vocabulary and stuff, a lot of the written material tends to be in English anyway, so if you're going to read it, you might have anyway. A lot of people have trouble with understanding what the staff are capable of doing. For rotational people, this is especially interesting because if you've had the same job with the same staff for 17 years, that learning curve of a year at the beginning to know who can do what and what the capabilities are isn't really a function. But when you've got 2 years, you can't afford to lose a year of that time trying to find out where everybody fits. I will tell you from my personal point of view, I err on the side of allowing staff to do their jobs. They were doing it before I got here. They are probably capable of doing it now that I am here. The only thing that's changed is my existence. And my head is not so big to think that that is an earth-shattering difference in their lives. This is me. You may be uncomfortable doing that, and I understand. It's not wrong. But at some point, you, as a manager, need to be comfortable knowing that if you walk up to one of your staff and say, do this, please, they are capable, trained, and able to carry out that function. We don't have the luxury of months and months and months to learn what they're good at. I have a strategy that I use when I arrive at a mission for the very first time. And I'll tell you, as an MCO, it's really amusing. I set up meetings, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour with every single staff member that reports to me directly or indirectly. Man, is it hell on my calendar. And you should hear the stuff that's said as soon as the invitations start going out. Oh, what's he going to want to talk about? What have I done wrong? What have I? I have an open door policy. People should know that. If the door is closed, something more important than what you want is happening in my office. Go away unless you can slide pieces of body parts under my door. Because it works both ways. Next time you come in and close the door, this is the most important thing in our world right now. So these are the kinds of rules I like to get down with people. I will ask people to do things. I am new at the mission. I have extensive knowledge of how the department works. I know nothing about the country. So I will get you, Pam. I know nothing about the country. So here is your chance to say, you know, in this environment, it might not work that way. Okay, let's talk about it. Or I will walk up to you and say, do this. Health and safety, security, policy, you can do this forever. It won't do you any good. I can negotiate on the stuff that's negotiable, because we don't need people's lives being upset every 2, 3, or 4 years when a new boss comes in, but every once in a while, these things have to happen. And these are the rules I need to get down, but at the same time, I want to discover what they like about their jobs, what they don't like about the jobs, what goes well, what doesn't go well. And it gets my mindset into the mission, and I start to understand what they're good at and not good at. And I cut that year-long learning curve down to a couple weeks. Not perfect, but for me as a strategy, it works. Pam.
I was just going to ask, have you ever heard of this this practice that some managers do? And I've seen it in the nonprofit world, and I'm seeing more, now that I'm doing this PASO thing full time, where people, as a team building exercise, you can put together a document, and it's like an operating manual for yourself. And you can Google, if you Google online, you can see, or that's where you would Google, you can see various examples, templates for these things, and people will put in there things like, what's the best time to approach me for a quick meeting. Like, some people, they want their half hour as soon as they arrive in the office, don't bug them before then. Or, how to impress me, like, be squared away when you come to meetings with all of your documents. And people do these for both themselves and for their teams to get a discussion going, and it saves like months and months, they say, in the things that you get to know about somebody after you've worked with them for almost a year. You can have this kind of upfront and have a discussion about it, and it also makes you think about it yourself.
That's my first meeting when I get to the mission. For me, that's why it's important. Lillian.
Oops. No, I like what you said, Bill, and I think based on my own experience of 5 different posts, particularly the locally engaged staff, when somebody new arrives, they're looking at you, and you probably have three weeks max to make an impression, preferably a good impression, because if you blow it, there are likely to be issues the rest of your posting. So I think people are enormously grateful, and I think this applies equally at headquarters, people are enormously grateful if people will sit down with them one-on-one and obviously focus on the work, but maybe some other things, professional development, anything they want to raise, because that builds a good professional relationship. It may also build loyalty and ultimately even affection. But the first 3 weeks, in my experience, are basically your honeymoon period.
And by the way, as a new manager, especially, I talk to the MCOs about this a lot, but this applies to everybody. The manager changes every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's insane to think that stuff has to change every time that the boss changes. You are going to show up at a mission, and you are going to look around, and you're going to see things, and you're going to say, oh, that's horrible, we can't do it that way. And you're going to want to try and change it. Stop. Take a deep breath, write it down in your notebook, put it in your watch, I don't care, and leave it there for 4 to 6 months, along with everything else you see. Look, if it's a health and safety issue, fix it, absolutely. And look at it, and then sit down one day, 4 months from now, with this list and say, oh yeah, that makes sense now. Oh no, this has got to go. Because by then you've taken enough. It's like moving into a house, and I don't know if you have the same problem I do moving into a new house, but the furniture has no reasonable expectation of being in the same place it was where the movers left it after the 4th month, because it's just wrong. It doesn't fit the flow, it doesn't fit the house, it doesn't fit. You need to move into the job, you need to feel the job, you need to understand the job. And this works with all the processes, and it works with the people. If it's a performance issue, manage from day one. If it's something that seems a bit weird, take some time and see if there's a good reason and talk it out. I don't want to sound like I'm a horrible person. The idea is to be reasonable through all this and understand your business. So there we go. That's another full day done in 5 minutes. I'm doing well. I want to talk about managing risk. Our department is really big on managing risk these days. Really very fashionable these days. To be clear, what the department thinks is really cool these days, private industry was doing 2 decades ago. We'll get there. Don't be terribly impressed by what the department is doing, because just don't be impressed. But the fundament and department, when it looks at risks, looks at this broad sort of risks to the department, and you've all filled out the risk thing in Strategia, and it is, you know, the risk of, and man, these are high level things. It is incredible how easy it is to lose sight of the fact that every time you make a decision, every time you have a conversation with somebody, every time you do something, there are risks involved. Risk management is not a Strategia exercise. Risk management is a way of life to ensure that every time you make a decision, you understand what the ramifications are. I don't have enough information, in my opinion, to make this decision now. What's the risk of me making a decision? What's the risk of me not making it now while I wait for more information? These are things we do on a daily basis. In many cases, the stuff is automatic. I mean, I step out of the house. I don't know if I've locked the door or not. I probably have, because brain says risk, lock the door, and it's automatic. And that part of the routine has become absolutely routine, but it's still a risk analysis. So yes, it is important that you fill out Strategia and the department understand what these things are. It's more important that as a manager, you understand that everything you do, everything you ask your staff to do, everything you write has an element of risk to it, and you've analyzed that risk in your decision-making process. Am I gonna detour? I love detouring. Am I gonna detour into decision-making here? No, I'm gonna make a note. The other side of risk is failure. Talked really early on, failures are the boss's fault, successes are the team's fault. How do you as a manager deal with failure? There's a gazillion memes out there about how stuff just would not improve without making mistakes first. If you wait for everything to be perfect and risk-free, everything will be perfect and risk-free, and everybody else will leave you in their dust, because they're prepared to accept a certain element of risk to get to the objective. Perfection is the absolute enemy of getting stuff done. Unless you're writing something for the minister's office. Take your time, get it right. No questions asked. But this is that risk analysis you've got to understand. And if you're looking at these discussions with yourself all the time, accept the fact that your staff need to have these discussions as well. How are you encouraging them to take reasonable risks in getting their tasks done? And what are you doing if they have failed? They took the risk and they weren't successful. Do you throw them out the 7th story window because they're the worst people in the entire world? Or do you sit down and have a discussion about what went wrong, why the decision went this way, and how can we improve on it next time? The reality is somewhere in the middle. Pam.
So I have a question and a comment. So my question is, how should a manager, like what criteria should a manager do, or what thought process should you go through to assess what is a reasonable kind of training type risk that you could let your people take versus, you know, what absolutely really needs to be done as perfectly as possible? And have you had this conversation with anyone in senior management? Because I do not really see, like, I see from my perspective now, I see a lot of conversation about how, yeah, we want to manage risk, we recognize risk, you know, blah, blah, blah. And really what I see is a lot of lip service to the idea, and an awful lot of senior people who are, you know, a friend of mine gave me a great analogy a while ago. She said, this person is desperate to impress, but terrified of making a mistake. And so you're constantly in a situation with your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. And understandably, the poor engine doesn't know what to do, you know, so.
For your head of mission, for senior management in this department, they go by the advice that people has given them. If they are getting bad advice, whatever, I mean, you can't know everything about everything. At some point, you have to trust somebody to tell you how to do the job properly. I'm going to leave that there. But for you to manage your program, the point of much of this discussion, the question then becomes, what level of risk that my employees are taking am I comfortable with? Man, I cannot answer that question for any of you, because it depends on where you are, it depends on your employees, it depends on you, it depends on the color of the sky on any given day. But you have to be aware of the fact, fundamentally, that if there's no risk involved, if there's no risk of failure, then you are not pushing the limits of what you can accomplish with your team. And to be clear, many of our staff, not all, but many of our staff, when they understand that they have this power of their own, and this gets a bit into delegating, feel more fulfilled in their jobs. And then you just have to deal with the jerk that's going to replace you, doesn't think the same way you do, and their life's going to become hell again. But I can't deal with that. If everybody did this stuff, we wouldn't have that problem. And this is why we give sessions like this, so that everybody can understand that these are how to manage. So all this to say, what are you comfortable with, given the expectations of performing whatever it is your objective is? And if the objective is getting a memo together for the ADM, you may have a much lower risk tolerance.
Because I think your risk tolerance as a manager has to be partly determined by what your boss's is, right? So,
or you have to have a discussion with your boss and have a discussion about what the risk is and how to manage it, because your boss isn't sitting here today.
Good point, yes.
So let's get a little bit to, so we've talked a bit about managing risk and how you deal with mistakes. How to deal with mistakes. Let's seg a little bit into managing people, because we're really bad at that. We're afraid to manage people, and we are guilty of you know, let me start with a story. One of my missions, I had a little sticky up on my overhead cabinets. And one person at the mission noticed that the number changed occasionally. He said, "What is that?" And I said, "The number of people I fired." He said, "What? You can't fire people." I said, "Yes, I can." It is our responsibility to manage our staff to do their jobs properly. Our staff need to understand that there are consequences to not doing the job properly. It's our job to facilitate them, make sure they're properly trained, make sure they understand, make sure they know all of those things. But at some point, something's not being done anymore. If they're LES, rule 1, if you've identified a problem, call the locally engaged staff people. You can do incredibly much, you can do a lot of damage to a potential case of dismissal or discipline against an employee if you do something wrong. The processes are very, very well laid out, very clear, and very fair to the employees. We're not being unfair. We want to get the job done. We don't want to punish them. We want them to get the jobs done. And HLD is really good at helping us get the right objectives. if there's a problem. So rule number one is make sure you've got the right people involved. Rule number two is do it. You've got 6 months left in your posting. You're going into pre-posting mode. You're into the got to clean up and get things ready for my successor. Well, one of those things you've got to get ready for your successor is make sure that employee is gone, or at least well on the way to being gone. Do not leave it. You've been living with it for 3 years. You understand intimately what's been going on. Don't leave it to some person fresh off the plane. Do your job. You are paid big money to manage, so manage. That's why you get the money, because you are a manager. If you want to be a manager, go back to being an FS2 or an FS1 or a CR3. You are paid to do this job, so do it. Yes, ma'am.
So
the pan, because you see the hand.
sorry, no, I just wanted to, it sounds like you were sort of talking mostly about like LES at missions, but I'm wondering if you could comment on headquarters, because one of the things that frustrates me sometimes in the union world is every so often we will hear about some situation where like something's really gone wrong, you know, and every so often I will get from managers, well, we would like to do something about this person and this terrible behavior, but you guys in the unions are tying our hands. And my response is always, hey, listen, don't put that back on us.
Absolutely.
You guys have to do your job. There are mechanisms, and there's a collective agreement, there are mechanisms laid out, and you need to be fair to employees. You can't just fire someone for doing something that they've been doing for the last 10 years without telling them that it's a problem, giving them a chance to change, offering, going through the steps. But we in the unions don't want people who are, screaming at people or committing fraud or doing, some of the bad things that do happen from time to time. It's management's responsibility to deal with those, and we need to deal with them when we're in management. So have you had experience with that, and how do you walk that line?
The fundamental rule in HR management is fairness.
Fairness?
Fairness. Everybody has agreed on processes in place. Follow the processes. It's not the union's job to save incompetent people. It's the union's job to make sure that everything was done so that the employee understands why there's a process in place.
And that people have a chance
very basic,
to correct.
You could go on for hours, but that's it. I mean,
issues,
it's not your job to save people. It's your job to ensure that they are treated fairly by whichever definition. So if in your dealings with your staff, you are being fair and you are following the rules, do not be afraid. Simple as that. You like the answer? That's a good answer. I like that answer. I've got 13 minutes left. Before I start on sort of another brief area, because anything you want me to cover more, or some questions, or because my experience has been that once a couple of questions are asked, light bulbs go on all over the place. And I have another meeting after this, so I want to be sure that we have the opportunity, not one I'm setting, by the way, and I will be on time. So I want to be sure that if you've got questions about anything I've covered so far, and look, I apologize. C'était une session très bref. We've covered a ton of territory, but what I'm trying to do is give you a mindset where you can be more comfortable next time someone says, you need to do this. Here's your staff. Whatever that, as a head of mission, as a DG, as a program manager, as a section manager, at some point you have to lead staff. And we've spent a long time dealing with the HR sides of this stuff. To be clear, as a manager, we could talk equally long about how to deal with money, something that we are appallingly bad at in our department. And money is not reporting on FinStat. FinStat is a tool for reporting, not a way of managing your funds. We could talk about other resource implications of management. But when I was an MCO trainee years ago, we had a discussion in our group at the Earl one evening after class about what the most important function of a manager was. And throughout the history of this department, we have made changes to improve financial management. We got rid of AMAs, which could do anything, and put in BMOs, which dealt with money. We got rid of senior MCOs and replaced them with FIs. This department has this fixation on how important money is. But I will tell you, as a group, we unanimously agreed that dealing with people was the most important thing in our jobs. Doing it fairly, doing it properly, being strong when you had to be strong. If there are no people there, if you don't have a good relationship with those people, nothing friendly, I'm saying a good relationship with those people, I don't care how much money you've got, you're not getting the job done. So I have this fundamental disagreement. This is me. Send me hate mail, I don't care, with the fact that the department often thinks that money is the most important thing. And look, Parliament doesn't vote for how many people, doesn't vote for who we hire and fire. It votes on how much money we get. So I understand that there's a need to focus on some of this stuff. But we're concentrating a lot of HR stuff today because that's where you are probably the most uncomfortable. That's probably where you lack the most knowledge, because we didn't hire to be an HR person. We hired you because you're really good at an analysis and ability to consult with people. And wow, you're really good at this stuff. Let's make you a manager. Congratulations. We've just taken a fabulous hockey player and put him in full hockey gear and dumped him on a football field. Good luck. So I want to be clear. This is an opportunity to, if you want to talk about anything other in managing a program, I'm good with that. But I just felt a need, based on my experiences, my observations, to deal with a lot of HR stuff. So no comments, I'll continue. We talked a bit about delegation.
You have one question, Bill.
Oh, I love questions. Go for it. Oh, Lillian, yes.
Yeah, so it was more of a comment on the bit about human resources. From my own experience, the unions can actually be very helpful. In one of my last assignments, as a DG in the department, there was I think she was an AS1 who had been chronic absenteeism, and the absenteeism was not helped by the fact that her Facebook page was incredibly active and completely open. And one could see quite explicitly what she was doing at certain times of the day, which were when one would normally expect her to be in the office. So, I mean, I got advice, and I think that's really important. I mean, I'm a little out of tune with the symbols, but there are people who are paid to be experts on how to manage situations. And I encourage the employee to bring her member of PSAC, to bring her union rep to the meetings, because it was important I felt it was important for him to sort of be part of the discussion. She wanted him there. And I thought that worked out well, because as Pam said, I mean, it's problematic for the unions because there are people who aren't working out for one or another reason. Classic other case, a friend of mine very recently discovered that several $1,000s were missing from the petty cash. This was not at Global Affairs. And figured out fairly quickly that his admin assistant had made off with the money and that it was being used at the casino over in Laclimi. And as it transpired, the assistant was going through quite a traumatic personal time. Now, you know, he did not phone the RCMP. He reached out in his department to the right section in HR. And it turned out, because all these people talk to one another across departments, there is in fact a whole protocol for dealing with people who've acquired, you know, gambling habits involving use of official funds. And again, it took some time, but it was resolved, and in what you would say, Bill, a very fair way. So, you know, seeking advice and not just reading the Treasury Board directive, I think is usually a good idea.
Well, and I mean, I would jump in and add also not being scared to bring something forward because you think it's going to necessarily mean horrible consequences for someone that might be in trouble, right? Like there are quite a lot of mechanisms built into the system. If someone has an addiction issue or, you know, something like that, like those are illnesses. And there's a lot of protections in the system to make sure they're, you know, that they have at least a chance to be dealt with that way, right? Sometimes the bottom line is, you know, that the person can't continue to work, and that's a different issue. But, you know, a lot of people I think are afraid to say something because they think, oh, my friend will get fired, and I know, you know, they just went through a divorce, and, you know, blah blah. Sorry, Lillian, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that in fact this particular case ended well because the employee got the money was paid back, obviously, and a schedule was determined. The employee was steered in the direction of the counseling to deal. It was a short-term problem, in fact, triggered by a divorce, and is now back at work. I don't know which government department, it doesn't matter, but same kind of, you know, excellent performance that had been her trademark before this all happened, and in fact I think has been promoted, so dealt with fairly. It took about six to 8 months.
Let's understand that we go to a lot of time and trouble and expense to hire people. Our first reaction should never be get rid of them. It's a waste of resources. Our first reaction is get them to do their jobs properly. Yeah. As a manager, what do you do to get people? Yeah, Suzanne's hand is waving madly over in the corner now.
Hi there. So as someone who's just finished my first posting and looking at my second posting where I'll be managing my first 3 people on a non-acting basis, I understand the importance of training. So I'm going to look at the middle management training in terms of getting myself prepared for being able to manage a group of 3 LES, for example. But I find throughout my 10 years here, training has always been a pass the buck kind of thing. My current manager doesn't want me to do this kind of training because it's not pertinent to the job I'm doing right now, but it might be relevant in a year or 2 or down the road. And then when I get down the road, I don't have time to do the training. I should have known this, or why didn't I do this training by the time I got there? This is a frustration I feel like at the lower level in terms of seeing what's effective and what's not effective around me and trying to apply some of those principles along with what you said today into good practice for future use.
Look at Lillian biting her lip. Do you want to answer that one? You're muted, by the way.
I just wrote you all a fond farewell.
Me too, yeah. Very quickly.
No, the training piece is one that I think I'd speak to CFSI or try to figure out, you know, if there can some sort of reasonable compromise can be worked out, because it's not really fair to ask people to go in and swimming in the dark. And there should be, we tend to do it in fits and starts. And I'm hearing rumors that CFSI is about to undergo major changes. I don't know if those are true or not, but it may be part of the rethink after the pandemic. And sometimes it depends on where you're situated. Your manager may be willing for you to get training outside the office. There are a lot of, you know, courses, including particularly now online, available through both the universities and the places like Algonquin and Cité Collégiale, which deal with, you know, management issues in a public service setting.
But always remember, as a manager, and Suzanne may be able, you may be able to see, I don't want to call it the failure of your boss, but one of our roles as a manager is to make sure that our employees aren't ready for the job they're doing, but also ready for their next one. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. There's a whole 2 minutes left, and I want to give me a chance to say thank you to everybody. And look, if you've got questions, I'm the only Milner, I think, in the book. I'm easy to find. And I want to give Pam a chance just to tie up all the loose ends here and say I got through about 3/4 of my list, by the way. So we did a good job today.
No, thank you, Bill. That was really great. I think, yeah, I'm happy with the discussion. Mary Claire, I see no, do you want to say hi? No, or ask a question? last minute? No? Okay. So thank you, Bill. That was really interesting. And thank you to everybody for participating. And maybe, Bill, if it's okay with you, maybe we can chat offline and see if maybe we might want to do another follow-up PAFSO breakfast or something to talk about what the bits that we didn't get to.
No problem.
Thanks, everybody. And we have our session on promoting psychological well-being at 3. So I hope those of you who are around will be able to join us. And I will see you soon. Merci.